Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. I'll probably just give ourselves just a minute or two to let anyone else connect, and we'll get started. I'll share my screen here. All right, I think we'll get started here. A couple of housekeeping items. First, thank you for joining us today. We're going to cover the changes, features, updates, enhancements that we've done in the last year. So kind of trying to encapsulate here all of the 2020 point something versions that you would have seen kind of throughout the last season. Kind of trying to recap. I know when the research season gets going hot and heavy, it's less likely that you're running updates or checking for updates every day, and so it's a lot easier just to get through the season. So we kind of like to recap and highlight what's different and things maybe you can take advantage of this upcoming season. So before we begin, just want to note that we are recording this session as we do all our webinars. So we'll be able to post the recording out onto the internet, and we'll send you a link that you can access that recording later. And feel free to share it with others that might not be able to attend today. The other thing is our chat, and I'm just sending a message through the chat. That's kind of the best way to ask questions. So as I'm going through some things, feel free to pop in with a question. If I cover something a little too quickly, or you want to know a little bit more about the topic we're talking about, that chat works very well. It's a pretty small group today, so if you feel more comfortable just turning on your microphone and shouting at me, feel free to do that as well. I usually like to try and save some time at the end of the session too. So if you wanted to wait towards the end, that is just fine. So, well, with that, I think we will get started here. And primarily, I'll be kind of going back and forth, I think, a little bit. I've got this PowerPoint presentation that kind of shows the features that we've added, but then we can jump over into the software to show it off a little bit too. And if there's questions, want to see a certain scenario or how something would play out actually in the program, we can have that flexibility to do so. All right, so first up is the weather graphing. And so that one of the larger features, I think, of just kind of new things you can do in ARM is to graph the weather data. So just a little background, in a trial, we have in your site description a weather tab where you can fill in daily weather details across the study. And so previously, it was just kind of a data dump where you could put that data in, but that's about all you could do is record it. And so we wanted to find ways that people could access that data, use the data, summarize it in some way. And so this is kind of our first tool for that, and it's really to graph the weather. And so a way to visualize the data that's there in the trial. And so we'll kind of segment each of these out here in the coming slides, but you can plot, 3 different pieces of information, columns in that weather table onto a graph is kind of the maximum number you could do on a graph, and then you can actually put several graphs on top of each other in this one screen. And then there is also a summarization here on the right that covers that range. So if we dive in a little closer here, as you're setting up the graph here, this is really the interface for that. And so here you kind of have 3 different data series. Again, that's the column of information in your weather table. And so you can choose what information you want to graph. You can actually use the left and the right axis. So here I have temperature on the left, and that's in blue. And then on the right, we actually have precipitation. So totally a different numbers, different values and different units themselves. So you can kind of have a dual purpose by using the 2 different axes, and then you have the 2 different values, but still on the one graph. And then you can, plot the individual values. So there with the average temperature, you can see how the temperature fluctuates each day throughout the season, but you can also do cumulative data. So the yellow here is actually the cumulative precipitation across that season. So you can see how it built throughout the season, while still being able to see, it looks like we had one day in June where we got a whole bunch of rain, and then it kind of just slowly continues to trickle up through the season. So lots of different options and configurations, just depending on, what data you're looking at and kind of maybe how you want to visualize it. And so there's actually a few different graph types available to kind of play around with, whether it's kind of have the line graph, but actually to shade the area under the line graph. There's a bar graph. The lines here are kind of what we're highlighting here. You can even do a scatter, a spline step, or the cumulative step as well. And then when you are looking at that graph, then once you kind of chose what you want to include on the graph generates, and there's actually a slider here that you can drag and choose only a subset of the date range. So you can slide in on the first graph to hone in and zero in on a particular date range from the season. And then the rest of those graphs kind of follow suit. And so then on the right-hand side, there's the weather summary that will show the all of the pieces of information that you're graphing. You have a minimum, you have the maximum, and the average. And those update as you change that slider. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a study here. Actually, I'm just going to toggle over to my other screen to grab the file that I need here for graphing the weather data. If I can find it here. It's kind of moved on me. So let's grab this one, and we'll just open up a trial. And just real quickly to show, in case you have not seen this feature, it would have been kind of from last year, where you can actually populate the weather. So just kind of depending on where your weather source is, here in this trial, we have that site description section with the weather. And so kind of the year prior, we had added a way to import that in. And so you can import weather data from a spreadsheet that you may have. From whatever weather source you might have. So here I've got a local station with daily weather, and I'm just going to quick show the settings that you go in when you first set this up, and kind of train ARM to say these are the column headings I have in my spreadsheet, and you can set the date and time settings, default units for those values. And you essentially kind of train and teach ARM to understand what your spreadsheet looks like. Then you tell it, all right, in my spreadsheet, my column is called temperature high, and I want you to put that information into the max temp column in the study. And so you're kind of creating a mapping there to bring all that data in. And so if I just go ahead and I will import that here. Going to ask me for my actual spreadsheet here. And then it loads in all of that weather data here for the date range defined. And it can kind of default to your initiation and completion dates. I have just kind of a narrow stretch here just for testing and illustration. So once you have that weather in here, so now our new feature for graphing weather, on the icon here at the top toolbar, there's a new weather graph, kind of initiates this process for graphing the data that's here. And so graph 1 is kind of the top one. That's our master graph. And so essentially you can just pick, okay, what column of data am I interested in? And maybe we'll just start simple and say, we just want our average temperature as a line graph, and we can choose how we label it. Maybe then I'll make a second graph with the precipitation, and maybe we want to make that be the cumulative precipitation we kind of showed in the PowerPoint slide, and we'll just say okay, and now it will graph out across our date range. In this case, it's admittedly a little small, but it will show that average temperature here as it goes through the dates that we've defined in that weather section. And then down here, we can see the cumulative precipitation as well. And just to show kind of this slider in action, so you can choose a specific date range. And so this top graph will continue to display everything, but you'll notice this bottom graph is actually updating that date range. So you could zero in on, maybe I just want to see this 1 week of November 14, November 21, or whatever range you might want. That will show just that piece of information in the other graphs. And then these values here are updating as well based on whatever range that you have. So kind of a lot of options there, just depending on kind of what you would want to visualize. And it's just kind of I think our first step into summarizing that. There's I think a lot of other things you can do with the weather, some calculations and stuff, but we're kind of trying to continue to add more things to do with that weather, because it seems that that's becoming more and more of an interest in the industry, or at least in a lot of different types of research, to kind of keep track of what the weather did during a trial. So, and then there is, just real quickly, there is a option to print the weather graphs kind of as you see it here. It'll print out whatever graphs you've defined, as well as that summarization table too. So you can generate a report and share that. There is also a copy if you were to right click, and that actually just copies essentially this image. So you could, if I were had a Word document open, I wanted to share that. It really just takes that screenshot, if you will, of the graph that I clicked on, and then you can paste it anywhere in a PowerPoint slideshow, other document, something like that, if you wanted to. So. All right, and you can, of course, it's kind of letting me know that you can save those settings. So once you kind of work on the process for setting that graph up, we can save those settings and give them a name, so that way you don't have to start from scratch each and every time you want to graph data from a study. And mine wasn't very sophisticated, so I won't bother saving that. But kind of like you can do in a lot of other spots in ARM is have that have those options there. So. That's the kind of, like I said, kind of the big highlight of the new features of new functionality you can do. Next one here are the column diagnostics. Again, quick background, kind of our new data review tool that was built a couple of years ago, and we continue to add on to its functionality. So here's a couple of highlights of things that have been added on and improved. First one is spatial analysis. And so really bringing in some of the spatial models that ARM could do. Previously, we had just this report in the print report list. Let me just real quick bring that up here in case you've seen that before. Underneath the AOV is a spatial AOV means table. So you could choose a particular spatial method or have ARM recommend the best one and then perform a spatial analysis, but really just within the reporting. And so now we kind of brought some of those brains, if you will, into the column diagnostics. So we have ARM action codes specifically for each of those spatial models. We have, the trend analysis. There's 3 different trend analysis. Really, when you're looking at analyzing the effects across the whole field. And then there are 4 nearest neighbor spatial models, and that's really when you're looking at the effects only in the space closest to the individual plot. So you're kind of looking at your neighbors as opposed to looking at the entire field and finding a trend across the whole field. It's kind of the main difference in the approach for those 2. And really, the idea behind the spatial analysis is that we are adjusting the mean estimates, just trying to attempt to recover some of that unexplained error in a field. So it's not something you would probably do, statistically speaking, it's not something you would dive into, every time you're reviewing data, every column that I should try to be running a spatial analysis. It's really more for, if your blocking design fails in a particular study, then this is a tool to kind of help recover and make do of with what you have, not necessarily something you would want every time out. And so we have all those action codes, and if you know exactly what you're doing with those spatial models, just using those action codes here in this list, you can apply them to a particular data column, and then ARM can apply that model there in the analysis. If you're not quite that advanced to know exactly what you want, we've enhanced the column diagnostics then to recommend and potentially include those in its recommendations. And so there's a checkbox on the diagnostics panel at the top that you can choose to include the spatial models. And so now that LST, QST, those action codes get added into the recommendations pool, if you will. And so depending on your study, depending on that data column, it may recommend that, using a spatial model, because it would, improve, that model would improve over your design model essentially. So if you're not totally confident or certain when it's needed or if it would be helpful, the column diagnostics can help and let you know when that might be appropriate, if you use the turning on that spatial models option there to see those. One more kind of utility related to the column diagnostics panel and that review process. There's the capability to print diagnostic plots. And so previously you just had a single PDF sheet, and it was kind of 4 by 2. I think you had 4 graphs on the left and 4 graphs on the right, and it could get a little squished. You might have to zoom in on the PDF to read it well. And so here we kind of added an option to choose the layout. So instead of squeezing 4 graphs onto the height of 1 page, maybe you want to change it to 2 by 2. So now there's only 2 graphs per page, a lot easier to maybe look at and see, or even if you really wanted to blow it up, you could do 1 by 1 and have just a single graph for each page and really see the entire diagnostic plot, because it'll take up just, a single page each even. In addition to, being able to customize how that, diagnostic plots are created, we added 2 more graphs specifically for those spatial models. So when you have that Use Spatial Models checkbox turned on, then if you show the graphs there, you'll see the residuals heat map, kind of comparable to our assessment map, drawing the assessment values onto your trial map basically. But in this case, it'll actually draw the residuals. And then you also have a spatial biplot. Is another option. Again, those are kind of just for diagnosing, and in these cases, kind of your spatial model. Is it appropriate to use a spatial model? Do we need one in this case? And then if you do select a spatial model, then is this the right one? Is this going to make the appropriate adjustment that I need, essentially. So just continuing to retool and add more functionality to that data review process of the column diagnostics. All right, so now kind of segueing into site description related features. These are a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit quicker to go through some of them. The first one is a copy application column. So a new little wizard here that kind of lets you duplicate application information that might be similar in multiple application codes. So one kind of piece of feedback we heard in some of our support calls, we've been trying to move people into using application codes to map out each of their applications, and in some research, it's really pretty monotonous, because really I'm doing the same thing each and every time, but maybe I have to do it 10 times or half dozen times, and so it's a little bit maybe annoying to have to go to the site description and fill in my mix size and my spray volume, things like that, when I'm doing the same thing each and every time. And so here we wanted to kind of save a little time, speed up the process a little bit. Once you fill in your first application with all of your details, then you can copy those details into several other columns. And so the idea and the hope being that it'll just save you time instead of hand typing or even manually copy and pasting multiple times. Just have ARM bring that information across. And I might actually, oh no, my slideshow is backwards. Let me switch that around here. And so just to kind of show here the in action a little bit. Again, you would have your first application has been filled in. I've listed out all of my details for that application, and now I want to have kind of those same details in additional application codes, because they're all the same. And so essentially there, you can just choose B and C, which application codes do I want to copy information into. And so then all of those details that you filled in A, you can choose and kind of preview on the screen before this actually happens to make sure that is what you want. And so the nice thing here is it will not overwrite information. So for example, I just said maybe my second application has a slightly different application amount and mix size for whatever reason, but the rest of the details are the same. Pretty much the same equipment, and then for application C, it's exactly the same as A. So just bring it all over. So you can kind of fine tune, which pieces of information, can be copied across, and it won't overwrite something that you've already filled in. There are also other sections. So, thinking of the site description, you have the application and the application equipment, as well as the crop and pest stage at application. All of those are kind of structured similarly. Each of them, have that application code documentation there, and they're all tied to those codes. And so you can actually do this same copying across to several different, several of those tabs all at the same time. Again, if they're about the same, then you can duplicate that information. And so here I've kind of I've got all of this equipment set up. I want to do the same thing on the application tab as well to duplicate the details and copy what I have in A and paste it into B and C all at once. But maybe maybe you don't want the stage information, because if you do that a week later, then the stage information might be different. So maybe I don't want to copy those details at the same time. And so it kind of gives you the control over it, but hopefully would be pretty quick still to save a little time entering in all those details again and again when they're all the same. So here's just a quick little video, a little easier just to maybe highlight exactly how you run that. And so there is a button here at the top of your application with a little copy button. And that's really how you initiate this feature here and get it going. And so when you press that button, then you get this copy application dialog appears. And so again, you kind of can see what column you chose to copy, and now you're choosing the columns to paste information into. And we get that nice preview. Again, we're not going to overwrite the information that we already had entered in B. Clearly, if you put information in there, you don't want it to be replaced. And there's where you can tie in some of the other sections also related to applications and kind of automate that copying in there. And so now when we come back, you can see the information in A is the same in B and in C, except of course for those couple of spots there at the bottom with the application amount. So hopefully just a tool, sorry, I'll go back here for a second. Hopefully just a tool that might save some time for at least studies where you have a lot of, maybe many applications that are all about the same, or even if there's just a couple of applications, but they're the very same, just a quick way to copy details across. Another small one here, but works pretty slick when you're in a repeating section. So something like here on the screen here, a pest description, you have multiple pests. There's now a little delete button that makes it really easy just to remove that repeating section. And so that works here in the pest description. We kind of have that collapsible panel, if you will, for each of those pests, because there's so many details that you can include there. A repeating section can also be a table or a grid. Here's our weather table, like we were just looking at before. There's another one. And so in a grid, if you go over to the left-hand side, just off that graph, or excuse me, the table, then there will be this little X button that pops up. And if you click on that, that'll delete just that row. In this case, being a table, it'll just delete that row right off if you don't want it. And here I've got another little video here. If we go to the next one, just to see it in action, you click into the row and the X shows up and it'll just deletes it. Kind of one of those pretty small things, and you might not have even noticed that it was put there and you just used it. It's kind of nice that you don't even really think about it because it's so intuitive. You can even grab a whole section of them, and there, if you highlight multiple rows and hit that delete button, it will delete all of them off. So a nice, just quick time saver. I think here we're just looping through that. So good time saver. If you do accidentally press that button and you didn't want to, there's under the edit menu, there's an undo. Or Control Z, I think, is the keyboard shortcut. So if you click, errant click ends up, getting rid of one of your pests or something, you can get it back automatically by just undoing that delete action. So the next one here is related specifically to just a particular type of field that you might find in the site description, where you have these numeric fields that they're in the site description, but they're also directly linked to something in settings. So something like your plot width and your plot length. It's listed in the site description, so that way it can be on the report, but it's also in the settings. ARM uses it in calculations, so it ends up in settings as well. So here's just a short little video on what you had to do before. So if you wanted to change that 5 value, when you pressed a button, it would bring you to settings, and then you could change the value. And then those values were tied, and that worked okay. But it really didn't make much sense to make you go to the settings and change it again. So here, when you change it on the site description, it'll just change it. It doesn't take you anywhere else. and then it will automatically be updated in the settings if you were to open up settings as well. So just a small little time saver, no real point to having to change the screen that you're looking at when you can just change the value, and then ARM will update the settings value as well. So, oops, now they're just playing again. On the contacts section of the site description, we added a new repeating section. So before, you kind of had these set, here's the study director, here's the investigator. You had a very set list of what contacts you could record. And so now we added a repeating section to the bottom that lets you define different roles and add more contacts of whatever type of person involved in the study. Now you have a lot more options to define them and list out their contact details. And so really that you can just continue to add more and more. So this is the 5th one, and the 6th one. You can continue to add more and define what role they had in that study. We also added this was really kind of a trial specific tab. This whole section of defining contacts was only in the trial. Now we added it to the protocol as well. So in the protocol, those same people are probably already involved and want to document. So now in a protocol, you'll see that in the protocol description, there's a section for contacts, and the very same fields and information is there to fill in. So that would be your options there in the protocol. And of course, what you fill in the protocol will copy over to the trial, just like with everything else. Okay, here transitioning to little tweaks here in the open study. So when you're opening up a file, this was kind of an annoying one. This was one that we heard a lot in support calls and some questions on. When you open up a file, you get this message that the study is stored in a temporary system directory, but it's just out on our network drive somewhere where we save all of our files. And so then ARM offers to move the study to an ARM data directory. And this would happen like every single time you'd open up a file. And so really the key here was that ARM didn't recognize for this, in this case, this G drive. We didn't go into our settings and tell ARM this is a place where I have my study data. And so then it would give us this message all the time. Well, it didn't really make any sense that you should have to go into settings and tell ARM all these different locations you might open up files. So we really got rid of this message except for a couple locations. So if you open the study from your downloads folder or a temporary directory in Windows, then you'll still see this message. That was really our goal in the first place, was to catch, for example, if you receive a file in an email and then you just double click that file directly from the email, then Windows saves that file just in a temporary location in order to open it up. And so, we wanted to prevent people from not realizing that it's in this temporary spot, because they could open it up, make some changes, save it, and then leave. And then at any point in time, Windows could just delete that file, because it's sitting out in that temporary directory. And so that was really the goal of this prompt. And it just kind of became, bigger than that and affecting just opening up files in other locations. So kind of tried to rein that in a little bit. So hopefully maybe that's just something that you didn't notice because it's not bugging you anymore. A little improvement there that you might still see if you're opening, files from an email, someplace that is kind of a temporary location. We want to make sure that in that scenario, you would save the study into a permanent spot so Windows doesn't just delete it at some point in time. Kind of related to this, here is a feature where you can kind of mark, not quite mark the file, but as you would want to maybe review a file real quickly. Maybe a colleague sends you this file. Hey, I'm gonna send this on, but just wanted you to look at it before I send it on. That type of scenario. You know, when you'd open a file, ARM automatically adds it to your study list, kind of no matter what. And so there was a request to say, well, maybe in some cases I don't really want them added to my list because I'm only opening it once and then they're going to be gone. And so we created a folder in your ARM data. So in Documents, ARM data, there's a folder called Review Only, okay, all pushed together in one word. And so if you open up a file from a folder called Review Only, whether it's the specific one in the ARM data, or if you create your own out on the network, the key is a folder called Review Only. Then when you open it up in ARM, it opens as read only, and it doesn't add it to the study list, and it doesn't bug you about, you know, this file being a duplicate of some other file in your study list. So kind of a nice way, you know, if you're only going to take a peek at this file and then move on from it, use a folder called Review Only, and that will, you know, kind of mitigate some of those pains that study list can introduce sometimes. And so here's just kind of a video showing here I've got an email. You know, can you just check this out? You know, save that file just in this folder called Review Only. And then now when we open up that file, and here we'll open it from ARM and say, open up that trial, and we'll pick it from that Review Only folder. Now it opens up as read only, and actually marks it as reviewed, kind of letting you know that we're assuming you're just trying to review the study. You're not planning to make changes. You just want to look at it. And so you can review the file and its contents, but then when you close, it's not been added to the study list, and it's not going to bug you that this is a duplicate of a file you've opened before. Here, just on the study list, if you're doing filtering in your study list, we just added a little text string here to note that there's an active filter. So you can kind of tell when you're looking at your list, wait a minute, there seems to be fewer here than I was expecting. Up at the top, it'll be telling you there is a filter that is active, and right now you only see 9 out of the 62 in your list because of it. Just a small little tweak. This one's just kind of behind the scenes change that really help, really more support oriented. So we upgraded the engine that runs the database. So the dictionary, all of the master lists in ARM were in an Access database file. And so we moved that system from Access and we made it into an SQLite database instead. So it's all behind the scenes. You know, you don't have to do anything specific in your ARM to turn this on or off, but instead it just kind of happened with the 2020.2 update. This was sent through. Really, the reason was that with the Access database, there was these drivers that we have to use in order to talk to an Access database. And so if you had a 64-bit Office installation, there were some quirks that could happen, and ARM could be really, really slow just trying to read one of those master lists. Also, any kind of Office, when Office updates would come through, we were finding every few months, all of a sudden, a bunch of people couldn't get into the ARM, or they were getting a bunch of errors when they tried to open their ARM because the Office update did something to the way ARM is supposed to communicate with that database. And so, you know, causing the mess. And so we really want to get away from that disaster zone of having people not being able to get into their software. So that was a change. Hopefully that then you don't have to think about it anymore because you're not having any of those errors and everything works smoothly. Plus side of it was that the study list rebuild is faster too, so a little more efficient as well. And we're beyond that, hopefully, if you've installed a newer version, but just a small note that it did require some admin rights just to move and get that SQLite system set up. All right, some features here specific for kind of editors in ARM. When you're looking at a validation list, whether it's a master list or your personal list, we added the ability to filter by blank entries in a validation list. So you can right click on a particular value in your list and filter by that value, but previously it didn't work if it was blank. So here I have a case where this might actually come in handy if you're looking at your formulation type and you want to see only items that are not undiluted, kind of a double negative there, but so you would want to filter by blank. So I don't want to see form types that are going to be undiluted, and so you can filter by blank to drop all of those out. So just a small enhancement there for validation lists. Another little tweak for the trial validation. There's a few spots in ARM where you can define a minimum and a maximum and then the average of something specific. Here, the example would be in the weather. You can put the minimum temperature and the maximum temperature for that day, as well as the average temperature. And so just kind of a new consistency check in ARM is now ARM will check to make sure that that makes sense. So here, a minimum of 72, but the maximum of 70 isn't possible. That's not right. And so we added that ability for ARM to pick up on something like that. Both that the minimum is smaller than the maximum, so that way those are in the right order, and then that the average is between the two. And so that picks it up here that there's just no way that this could ever happen because your minimum is larger than the max and the average isn't even between the two. So that's none of those things make any sense. And so those types of issues, it wouldn't be super obvious to an eye just kind of scrolling through editors. ARM can help you and pick up on those situations. And so a couple places that exist, here on the weather tab, I think that happens in several spots. Also the assessment editor for the stages, I think the crop or the pest stage, and then also on the crop and pest stage and application section of your site description. There's minimums and maximums and averages. And so ARM will pick up if what's been recorded there doesn't quite make sense. Update here of just kind of a placement of some features. And so the connection to applications for data collection have been kind of compiled together. So they were just kind of scattered a little bit in ARM. So we kind of wanted to put them together. And so here we have a wizard called Connect Electronic Data Collector that we're trying to compile those different abilities to use another source to collect data is essentially what we wanted to do. So previously they had their own menu items and toolbar options, and now they've been kind of coalesced into one. So both the Mirrors connection, the Harvest Master Mirrors software, and then the Excel rating shell. So you just may have noticed all of a sudden that those toolbar buttons weren't there. Instead, there's this connection toolbar button instead, and that'll pop up this wizard. Functionality did not change at all, just the placement of where these were found, bringing them together so it's a little easier collectively to find them instead of being scattered. Just a small update for the import weather data. So kind of the very first feature we had for importing weather data was to interface with the Iteris Clear Egg subscription. The company had weather data. You could subscribe to their service, and for any GPS location, a GPS coordinate that you provided, it could look up the weather details and automatically bring it into ARM. Only change here was a name change. So the Itiris, that clear egg functionality was purchased by DTN, and so same tool, same functionality. Nothing's changed as far as ARM is concerned and its abilities, but we just went in and changed the text. So the name is not Itiris, but it is DTN instead. But it is really the same function, and perhaps if you were using that subscription, I would imagine maybe DTN probably reached out to you already just to communicate that change. On the assessment editor here, if you have assessment images attached to your plots here, there wasn't a way to remove a bunch of them at once. You know, they're kind of linked here on the properties panel. And so you have to click into each plot and then click the remove button if you wanted to remove that link to that image. And so here now we added away. Basically now you can multi-select and just drag a multiple plots at once, pressing the remove button. Now that removes those images in the plots there that you highlighted. So a way to remove all of them all at once. So that way you don't have to pick and choose each one going down the list if they were attached wrong or you don't want them attached any longer. Oh, and then it's going to play for us again. There we go. Oh, we had that already. I think we're going backwards somehow. We did that. Okay, so real quickly, treatment type. We just added a new treatment type for substrate. So a surface or material, like a type of potting soil, just kind of a particular type of research that didn't have a way to put in their treatments because it didn't really match any of the types that were already there. So just adding a new type there. If you are doing that type of research, it's a little easier maybe to document your treatments now. Graphing. So we updated it's mostly a behind the scenes change for the graphing functionality in ARM. So the control, you know, kind of programmatically, the tool that we were using to generate the graph was very, very old. So old that the company that made it is actually out of business. So it's kind of a ticking time bomb for us that at any point in time, without warning, some Windows update could just appear someday, and boom, it's broken for you know, without any support of having that the company that makes the tool be able to, you know, be on top of those things or fix a problem like that. So we wanted to kind of port everything over to a new utility, and that's really all we did here. We didn't really leverage any new functionality, but we just kind of wanted a one-for-one, bring everything across. A little bit more modern feel here in this case. About the only real visual change you'll see is the box whisker doesn't have that waist. This is kind of a more standard. Pretty much every tool, graphing tool that we looked into, all of them had the box whisker drawn this way instead. That's about the only real big difference that you would see. But being on this new tool, you know, might give us the capability of, you know, bringing even more functionality and tools in the future as well. But our biggest priority was, let's get this thing updated before someday it's just gone. So. All right, study rules. Some new rules that you can leverage here. Review GPS is a rule here you can now define in a study. And so when you apply this rule, it requires that a user confirms the GPS coordinates when they are entered in the study. So we have this trial location GPS wizard that was added the prior year, and essentially opens up a satellite map. It just maps it on Bing Maps, just kind of like Google Maps, but the Microsoft version was easier for us to utilize. And so it will draw out all of the coordinates that you have defined in that trial and draw them on a satellite map so you can see them. And it can be kind of a nice way to catch any mistakes. So if you forget a negative, have a negative or forgot the negative, all of a sudden your coordinate is in the middle of the ocean. This is a nice quick way to spot something like that. And so that was a nice tool that we added. And so now here we added a study rule to make sure that the trialist would utilize that tool before they send their trial on. And so when they enter the coordinates the first time, or when they save and validate the study after coordinates have been put in, then they're required to validate, visualize, look at the screen, and then confirm that those are correct. And then once that's been done once, then it's good. It's not going to make them look at that screen every single time they validate. But once somebody has done that once, then it marks it in the trial that, yep, GPS coordinates have been validated. Another rule, kind of in the same spirit of having a trialist review information, this one is to actually review the list of study rules. And so this one will require that the person opening the file reviews the study rules before they continue and actually edit the trial. And so when you the first time that a person opens up that trial, when you've applied this rule, then a confirmation comes up that says that study rules are active and you are required to review them. And so that way you're essentially, in kind of a sponsor trialist situation. It's a nice way for the sponsor to, be certain and say that you have agreed to these study rules and you need to follow them. And so once that person has opened up the study and they accept those rules, then the file opens and it proceeds like normal. And again, this prompting is per license. So one person, the first time, like I would open the file, I will see this dialog, I'll confirm it. And then if I open the file again, I won't be bugged again. Only once for me, but then if my colleague were to open that same file, they too would need to confirm those study rules. And then after that first time, they won't see the prompt as well. So that one can pop up multiple times just if different people are opening the study. Kind of a nice contractual type of rule there. I'll go kind of quickly through the rest of these here as we're getting close on time. The GLP and GEP rule sets. So here, when you're creating a new protocol, if you are defining a GLP or a GEP study, here in the protocol settings, there's a new option that displays study rule sets. And so basically, if you create a study rule set whose name starts with GEP or GLP with the underscore after it, then those rule sets will show up in this list. So kind of a nice shortcut that might go along with GEP studies. You probably have particular requirements. This is a nice shortcut that you just click the little checkbox and that'll apply those study rules, that whole list. It'll add all of those rules to that study kind of automatically. So it's kind of automating that process. Another new study rule, this is allowing you to lock certain settings options so that somebody cannot change just particular pieces of information in the settings. Specifically, the treatment units, the study design, the number of replicates, the option to have or not have a non-randomized replicate, and then the treatment adjacency, kind of for randomizing the trial. And so this would be a way, if you don't want a trialist to be changing these values, then you can create a study rule to make sure those cannot be changed. Might be a recommended tip here is to use the recommended rule instead of requiring. So that way a cooperator would be prompted and kind of warned about changing the information. But if there's some emergency, some reason they absolutely had to change that, ARM will let them. Otherwise, you would be required to kind of send them an updated file with the relaxed rule. So this one, treatment fields. So you can now require or recommend certain treatment fields. You know, the treatment column there in the treatments editor. You can require pieces of information be filled in. The little brains behind that, ARM will not require that information. If you apply that rule, it will not require it for treatment lines that are marked as check, or crop, or cultivation. Certain treatment lines that aren't product related. And there is a treatment type check T that still would have you enforce the rule on the untreated lines. Just a quick kind of behind the scenes update on rules, the permissions. So if in the sponsor trialist type of setup, typically the sponsor adds their rules and sends the file to the trialist. But if the trialist were to add their own rules, then previously those rules were owned by the trialist, and so they could accidentally cause the sponsor some trouble, and the sponsor technically wouldn't have rights to change those rules added by the cooperator because they weren't the company with the cooperator. And so this was an update so that if you are the protocol owner, then you retain rights to be able to edit any rules that are added to that trial, regardless if they were added by somebody else. So just kind of helping the sponsor in case there's some sort of issue, they would need to change those rules. Hidden fields. Previously, if you had a study rule that was hiding information, the rule itself was also hidden in the trial, and that could lead to some confusion. How come I can't see this information? And then if you looked at the study rules, you didn't see that there was any indication that there was a hidden rule. So we got rid of that and made sure, at least it's obvious now, if you look at the study rules, there's some information that's being hidden. Some updates for standard evaluations. Really, when you're going through the process to create an SE, we added a list of rules, list of study rules that will be included with the SE. No change in functionality, that was always the case, but it wasn't necessarily clear. So now we added kind of a indication, look at all of the study rules that will be included in your SE. You also, kind of existing functionality, if you're the protocol owner, you had the option to drop out those rules. And so on that dialog, if you are the protocol owner, there is an option on that new dialog that lets you do that. When you're choosing SEs from the validation list, you can now select multiple SE files at once, and it'll load multiple SEs at one time, instead of having to choose one and say, okay, go back to the list and choose another one. And just use the control buttons. If you hold down the control keyboard option, when you have that list displayed, you can select multiple of them. And then when you click OK, it'll load them either on the assessment data or the SE definitions. The build headers functionality, if you've used that kind of in conjunction with the SE definition section, before that was only in the protocol, we brought it over to the trial so you can build your headers in the trial, just as long as you haven't entered data. Then we can toss out your data columns and build them from your SE definitions. Real quickly, here are some of the reporting. We kind of enhanced a message so you know if you have a protocol report when you're trying to print a trial, or vice versa. some messaging to kind of clarify that a little bit. You can choose the number of characters to clip. So if you have like a scientific name in a data column, those can be pretty wide. And so now you can kind of customize exactly how many characters get included before we kind of clip everything else off. In the product amount totals report now, there's a new option. You can group those totals by particular fields. So if you're batch reporting multiple trials, you can group them by investigator. So you know exactly how much to send to Carl in this case, and then Samuel in this case. You can split it out by a particular field. And just a couple of quick items for a summary across trials. There was an issue with the exclude button. So if you were looking at the filter list, you picked your item to click the exclude button. We kind of patched up an issue where this actually works the way it's intended. It does exclude those values. And then we had, we've actually updated this, and we'll kind of cover that in next week's webinar. We've actually even tweaked this option as far as trying to include non-analyzable data columns in the summary. So I'll actually kind of leave that one hanging for next time. We actually made this into another option more recently than this. So. All right, so I got a little long-winded, and so we've kind of hit our hour. Just to respect people's time, I want to let you off the hook. But if you do have any questions, I am available to kind of hang out for a little while still. So don't feel like you have to. If you had any questions covered, well, like I mentioned at the beginning, we are recording this, and we'll send you a link for that recording. And specific to this session, actually, if you opted into our learning management system, that LMS system, we're kind of starting something new this year, kind of trying to track ones that you've participated in. And actually, specifically with this webinar, it kind of lines up with a course we have already in our LMS, and it's called the Staying Current with ARM. And so each year, kind of towards the end of the year, we are going to create a course here called Staying Current for that year. And it really does exactly what we covered here today, where we go through all of the changes and features that have been added. And so we have the presentation, which we covered today, and some of the videos that we covered. So really everything in this course we just did together here in this hour. And so I just kind of wanted to show you this. It will be in your course list in the LMS if you've signed up. And if you wanted to, you could go here and just kind of click through all of this content. And at the end, there's an assignment. It's just a little practice. You can kind of choose which of those big features we covered. There's kind of a little assignment for each one of those, just for you to practice. You download an example file, and we have just simple instructions just to kind of get you into the software and to see the feature in action. So if you wanted to try that out, you've done the heavy lifting, you learned all about it already. You could go in here and do that assignment, and then we get notified when you've completed the assignment. I just go in and see what you've done, and then mark it as complete. And you'll get a certificate to say that, hey, you're current, you're up and current with ARM 2021. So just kind of specific to this session specifically, you've kind of done the hard work. And so if you want to go and find that, I just want to plug that particular session. But in general, the LMS here will put the recording on, and even if you did not opt into that LMS, we'll send everyone a link. You can either watch it on YouTube or within our system here. So again, thanks everyone for joining. And I'll stay on the line here for another minute. If you have questions, you want to put them in the chat or talk through them. But thanks for joining us today, and hopefully we'll maybe be seeing you soon at another webinar we've got coming up this month. So thanks everyone.